help, somebody comes forward and finds a reason why we can't help them. This is the day to help those American people. Let's not let them be too small to help while others will allow banks to be too big to fail. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time's expired. Gentleman from Alabama.
Mr. Chair, at this time I yield 3.5 minutes to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Hensley.
Gentleman from Texas is recognized for 3.5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, we cannot lose sight of the fact that our nation is drowning in a sea of red ink. It is this sea of red ink that continues to hamper job creation. Job creators today are uncertain of our future. They know, though, that historic levels of debt lead to historic levels of taxation, which can only lead to historic levels of unemployment. They are looking for some signal from this body that we get it, that we're going to stop borrowing 40 cents on the dollar, much of it from the Chinese, and sending the bill to our children and our grandchildren. Again, when the annual deficit was $200 billion and dropping, as opposed to the monthly deficit, which is now over $200 billion. But when the annual deficit was $200 billion, the gentleman from Maryland, the Democratic whip, said that was fiscal child abuse. Now, my friends on the other side of the aisle are introducing the term mean-spirited. I don't know. Is fiscal child abuse mean-spirited? It's their term, Madam Chair. I'll let them reflect upon that. Now, I hear the ranking member talk about fiscal responsibility, and he points to one item, cotton. We've heard cotton throughout this debate. But I would note that the chairman, rather the ranking member, apparently voted for the conference report on the Farm Bill, which includes cotton subsidies that he comes to this floor to decry. He speaks about a WTO decision, but it's the Obama administration that says that countervailing measures would have cost this country more than $800 million. I suppose we could have that debate, but I would recommend that the ranking member have the debate with the Obama administration, because that's where many of us got the information. I'll yield to the ranking member.
There were two ways we could have dealt with it. Yes, the gentleman in the Obama administration were on one side. I disagreed with the President. We could have avoided that by reducing American cotton subsidies to the same amount as they do in Brazil. So we could have either saved $300 million or not.
Okay, I have the point. Reclaiming my time. Reclaiming my time, I would just point out to the ranking member, that was not the vote before us. And if there was a chance to get out the cotton subsidies, and I must admit people on both sides of the aisle vote for them, but the opportunity was at the point of the conference report on the Farm Bill, which the gentleman from Massachusetts voted for. But to put this again in a larger context, we on this side of the aisle fervently believe that you will not have job creation until you put the nation on a fiscally sustainable path. We're talking about $1 billion here. If we can't do it on this program, what program can we do it on? And I must admit, I also find it ironic how many of my friends on the other side of the aisle will come to the floor and say, you know what, there are people in this nation trying to force loans onto people who are unemployed, people who can't afford to pay it back, people are in debt. That's predatory lending, and now they want the government to do the same thing.
Madam Chair, I yield additional 30 seconds to the gentleman from Texas.
Gentleman's recognized.
We heard throughout the debate there needs to be a consistency of debate. So let me get this right. If a payday lender is guilty of predatory lending if they loan money to somebody who is underwater, somebody who may be struggling. But if the federal government does it, it's something else. It's noble. I don't see the consistency in the debate there, Madam Chair. But again, most importantly, when does the day arrive that we quit spending money we do not have? I say today is that day.
Gentleman's time's expired. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
How much time is remaining, Madam Chair?
The gentleman from Massachusetts has 3.5 minutes, and the gentleman from Alabama has 9.5 minutes remaining. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Parliamentary inquiry. Do we have general leave?
Yes.
Thank you. I yield myself my remaining 3.5 minutes. First of all, the last argument is, of course, totally contradictory from the gentleman from Texas. But when you just want to bash things, you'll say anything. You cannot simultaneously say this program is too generous because of its forgiveness and is a predatory loan. In fact, it has very generous forgiveness provisions, which is why it is scored at 84%, not 98%. So that argument the gentleman just made is, of course, entirely self-contradictory because it can't be both. Secondly, as to agriculture, I did vote for conference for an amendment that would have changed it, but the gentleman, the spectacle of my Republican colleagues hiding behind Obama is bizarre. You could have done what we've offered, which was to cut the $150 million from going to Brazil and then cut it out of America. But it's not the only item I mentioned. I mentioned the $1.2 billion the gentleman wanted to send to Iraqi security forces, the $400 million to build infrastructure in Kandahar and Kabul, the $250,000 limit the Republicans rejected on individual entities. So no, there are billions in agriculture and the military. I didn't just mention one item. The gentlemen do understand that they're vulnerable, so they blame Obama. They and Obama are both wrong about sending money to Brazil. But the most important point is this, and I hope in his final time the gentleman from Alabama will address it. In the first place, on two of these programs, the HAMP program, which we will deal with next week on the floor, and the FHA refi, the money doesn't come from the Treasury. They keep saying it, but they are wrong. And ignoring a fact doesn't make it go away. Those are funds that come from TARP. In the financial reform bill, we reinforced an earlier provision, and I will subject it to the record. I'll put it in the record. It says, the FDIC is authorized to conduct risk-based assessments on financial companies to pay for this, the money that's left in the TARP. We have a mandate to the FDIC so that when the TARP is finished, large financial companies will have to pay this, not the Treasury. Now, I know that troubles people on the other side. They are solicitous of these large financial companies, but when they talk about it adding to the deficit, they're wrong. It is statutorily required that this will come, over their objection, from the large financial institutions. And as to the other two programs, including the one today, we had similar language in our bill to do that. It was rejected by the Republicans because we needed to get 60 votes in the Senate. So yes, for now, that $840 million will come out of the taxpayer. If we had our way and the Republicans had not been successful in frustrating us, it would also have come from Goldman Sachs and from Morgan Stanley and the other large institutions. And I will give them another chance. So the fact is that the bulk of this money does not come from the Treasury. It is mandated that it will be repaid back to the TARP, and I hope the gentleman from Alabama will address that in his final remarks. Is he for repealing that? Does he believe we should not, as we have said we would twice legislatively, including in one bill he voted for, assess the large financial institutions and hedge funds? Does he want to take it off? But of course, if he doesn't, it doesn't come from the Treasury. It doesn't add to the deficit. It may reduce the bonuses at some of the large financial firms. It may reduce the dividends at some of the large financial firms, but that's not adding to the deficit in a way that we care about. And as to the other money, the money for the Neighborhood Stabilization Program and for this program, if they will come back with us and join, that also will come from the large financial institutions. So let's drop the phony argument about the deficit. If you want to protect the large financial institutions, be honest about saying so.
Gentleman's time's expired. The gentleman from Alabama.
Madam Chair, I claim the remaining time.
Gentleman's recognized.
The American people have sent us here to tell the truth. And the truth is that there are too many government programs that do not work and actually make things worse. And these government programs are paid for by the American people. You can say that it's not from the Treasury or that it's from the Treasury, it's from TARP, it's not from TARP, but the fact remains that it's from the American taxpayer. In fact, the TARP funds, which the gentleman at one time, he said it comes out of the Treasury. Then he said it comes from TARP. But the promise in 2008 was it would go back to the American people. It would go back in the National Treasury. And in fact, it does not, and I'll address where it goes. And I think the American people would be, when they find out where it goes under this program, they're going to be even more upset. And I don't think they'll be surprised, because I think they've come to realize that there's not a lot of will in Washington to protect them, the taxpayers. But the American people already know that there are too many effective government programs that cost too much, and this is a poster child for those programs. If you can't cut this program, I'm not sure you can cut any. And when we find such programs, we as the representatives of the people have a duty and a responsibility to the taxpayers to end these programs, and that's what we're doing this morning. We're going to end this program. That's what we're here for. We, in this legislation by Mr. Hensarling, we stop a $1 billion failed spending program. Now, it's a well-intentioned program, but just as the road to hell is paved with good intentions, so is the road to higher deficits and a record-breaking debt, a debt that our children and our grandchildren will have to pay. You know, when we talk about the taxpayers ultimately fund this program, when we borrow 42 cents out of every dollar, it's our children and our grandchildren that will have to pay for these programs. We're charging something, and we're telling them to pay the bill. Today we have an unthinkable debt of $14 trillion. $14 trillion. A debt that imposes a birth tax on every child born in America. It's $45,000 today. Just last year it was $35,000. It's grown by $10,000. Even worse, this debt, or birth tax, is growing every day because our government is spending some days $5 billion, some days $8 billion more than it takes in, and adding to what our children and grandchildren will have to pay. And one question that the American people often confront is, are they better off than their parents, and will their children be better off than they will, and their grandchildren? It's interesting that in survey after survey, or poll after poll, the American people say we were better off than our parents. Our parents fought for our freedom. They preserved it in numerous wars. They saved their money. They watched their money. They worked hard. And they left us in good shape. But when that same question is a little different question, do you think your children or grandchildren will be better off? The American people, they know. They instinctively know. No is the answer, sadly, and that's because of our national debt and our deficit. In fact, both our Secretary, our Joint Chiefs of Staff and Robert Gates have said that it's a national security problem. Our debt threatens our very existence as a country. This Washington spending binge is driving our country right off a cliff. We've seen the effect of overspending on our economy today. The government absorbs so much money from our citizens that it's hard to create private jobs. Each dollar out of the economy is a job that the private sector can't create. Now, actually, President Reagan and President Clinton both realized this, and they grew the economy. And those were the only 2 years with a growing economy and government spending either level or going down. That's the only time in our country we had a surplus. They both realized that it was the private sector that would see us out of this. So this growth, in the growth in the federal government, and its spending is hampering job creation. And that's what these homeowners need. They need a job. Let's look at this program. And this is from the Obama administration. This is their budget that was just filed. And here's what the American people need to know. What does this program do? It offers a loan of $50,000, up to $50,000, to pay all arrearages to homeowners on their first mortgage, $50,000. And then to pay up to 24 consecutive months of mortgage payments, 24 months of their mortgage payments. Now, both the gentleman from Texas and the gentleman from Massachusetts kept talking about the large financial institutions. That's who is owed the money. And, in fact, we're not getting this money from the large financial institutions. Just the contrary, we're paying them because they're the ones that hold this mortgage. So when the taxpayers write a $50,000 check under this program to pay arrearages on the mortgage, who do you think it goes to? It goes to Bank of America. It goes to Morgan Chase. It goes to Citigroup. And it's shocking that the gentleman from Massachusetts would actually say that this money is coming from the very institutions that are going to receive this money. This $1 billion is not going to homeowners. It's going to these large financial institutions. And he says they're the ones that ought to be paying this, not the homeowners or not the taxpayers. We always thought the homeowners were supposed to pay their mortgages, but I think we could all agree, that it's not the taxpayer. It's just an astounding thing. And he says that Flip Wilson, if Flip Wilson told us to vote for something, we would. But it wasn't Flip Wilson. It was Ron Kirk. And what did he tell us? And listen, if I were Chairman Frank, I would talk about anything but this failed program. I mean, I think that's why they've talked about everything but this failed program.
The gentleman yield.
Because it was Ron Kirk that told us that our automobile sector would suffer, our pharmaceutical sector would suffer. He said that this would cost jobs in medical equipment, electronics, textiles, wheat, fruit, nuts, cotton. He did conclude cotton. He said $60 billion worth of exports were at risk. Well, do the math. 7,000 jobs for each $1 billion worth of exports, that's 420,000 jobs. So do you want to vote against something that would put 420,000 Americans out of job? And then they would all line up for another government program that the minority would design? You know, the other thing, and this is the last thing I'll say, they keep saying that we'll pay it, that the taxpayers will get paid back. Well, let me introduce this. This is from the Obama administration. This is their same budget for the fiscal year 2012. It estimates the losses on this program, and they've accused us of making up these figures, 97.72. That's the loss on this program. 98 cents out of every dollar. Thank you, Madam Chair. It's time to end this failed program.
Gentleman's time's expired. All time for general debate has expired. Pursuant to the rule, the amendment in the nature of a substitute printed in the bill should be considered as an original bill for the purpose of amendment under the 5-minute rule. No amendment to the committee amendment in the nature of a substitute is in order, except those received for printing in the portion of the congressional record designated for that purpose in a daily issue dated March 9, 2011, or earlier, and except pro forma amendments for the purpose of debate. Each amendment so received may be offered only by the amendment who causes it to be printed or a designee and shall be considered read if printed. The clerk will designate Section 1.
Be it enacted. Section 1, short title.
Are there any amendments to Section 1?
Madam
Gentleman
Chairman.
from Texas. For what purpose does he rise?
Madam Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate. Section 1 is currently pending, and the gentleman's amendment is to Section 2.
Madam
Section
Chairman.
For what purpose does the
Chairman.
gentleman from Ohio rise?
I move to strike the last word.
Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
Yield for unanimous consent to the gentleman from Arizona.
Gentleman's recognized.
Madam Chairwoman, I unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks on my opposition to this bill.
Without objection.
Thank you very much,
Gentleman from Ohio.
Madam Chair. This is a very strange Congress. At a time when Wall Street has been bailed out, banks have been bailed out, banks were bailed out who kicked people out of their homes. Now the programs that have been created to help keep people in their homes, these programs are going to be canceled by the majority, which of course will cause people to lose their homes to the banks. So the banks in America have people coming and going. And they keep getting more and more money. Madam Chair, millions of Americans are facing or will face foreclosure in the coming months. Their hold on their homes has been endangered by unemployment or predatory loan terms or falling house values. We are in the worst crisis facing homeowners in the history of this country. And the facts are well known. No one in the House can feign a lack of knowledge of the misery that has gripped American homeowners and neighborhoods across the country. Yet today, this House takes up a bill to terminate a program intended to assist distressed borrowers. Next week, the House will consider more bills to eliminate 2 other assistance programs. What message is this Congress sending? If you're a distressed borrower, or if you have a relative who's in trouble, or a neighbor in distress, the message of this House is tough luck. Word about losing your house? Tough luck. Government assistance to distressed borrowers should be effective. I can agree with my colleagues on that. I share the belief that some of the programs intended to assist distressed borrowers do not help enough people. But is that an argument to just end the programs? You know, people need help. The programs aren't effective. Just say, well, we're going to end the program. How does that help people stay in their homes? It doesn't. I submit that the fundamental problem with these programs, is that they depended on the voluntary participation of the very banks and servicers that created the housing crisis in the first place. So the programs are set up where you need the banks to participate. Banks don't want to participate, or they slow walk the applications, and before you know it, people are just left in a desperate strait where their homes are being lost. Now, when the banks were in trouble, taxpayer assistance was rushed forward. I voted against the bailouts. Now that the banks have emerged from a crisis, unfortunately, our friends in the majority are determined to dismantle the few legal efforts that are there to preserve and protect homeowners. We should be reforming these programs, not dismantling them. If the House approves the bill before us today, H.R. 836, Congress will be turning its back on people whose lives have been wrecked by a crisis created by irresponsible banking practices. So I'm urging a no vote on the bill, Madam Chair, but I also hope that we take a very cold and sober look at what we're doing here. We're really attacking the very victims of this housing crisis, and we're giving comfort to those who created the crisis. I yield back.
Gentleman from Ohio yields back. Any other amendments to Section 1? If no further amendments, the clerk will designate Section 2.
Section 2, rescission of funding for emergency mortgage relief program.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas rise?
Madam Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate.
Amendment number 5, printed in the congressional record, offered by Mr. Canseco of Texas.
Gentleman from Texas is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I want to thank my colleague and friend from Texas, Mr. Hensling, for offering the bill to terminate the Emergency Mortgage Relief Program. The amendment I'm offering will ensure every penny of savings that comes from terminating the Emergency Homeowner Relief Program will go back to the Treasury's General Fund in order to reduce the debt of our country. We are in the midst of a spending-driven fiscal crisis. Today, every child born in the United States is responsible for more than $45,000 of the debt. If we don't stop spending and put our nation back on a sustainable fiscal path, we will ensure that the future of our children and grandchildren drown in a sea of red ink. The total debt of our nation is on track to equal the entire size of our economy. The debt held by the public today is $10.43 trillion. That represents 69.4% of GDP. Per household, this is $89,007. The gross debt, according to the monthly Treasury statement through February, our gross debt is $14.194 trillion, which is 94.41% of GDP, or $121,128 per household. No nation in history has ever survived a debt burden the size towards which we are hurling. As I travel across the 23rd District of Texas, over and over, I hear of every very real concerns my constituents have over our out-of-control Washington spending and our exploding deficits and debts. The facts are really frightening. There's over $14 trillion of debt on the backs of the American families. We've had 2 straight years of trillion-dollar-plus deficits. The CBO projects that the deficits for fiscal year 2011 will be $1.5 trillion, and the President's recently released fiscal year 2012 budget projects more than $1 trillion in deficits. Admiral Mike Mullen, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, has warned that the most significant threat to our nation and its security is our debt. These are dire facts and are more than just numbers on a ledger. They represent a real threat to our economy and our security and job creation. Yesterday, Moody's announced that they had downgraded the debt of Spain, another country in a long line of downgrades in Europe. Will the deficits and debts realization, you cannot say that would never happen in America. Spain is expected to have a budget deficit of 6% of GDP in 2011, while the United States is expected to run a deficit of about 9.8% of GDP in 2011. Without a change in our course, we are on track to become the next Spain, the next Greece. The writing is on the wall. We are headed for a fiscal and economic nightmare if nothing is done. This is an unsustainable path that will end one of 2 ways. Either we have the courage to tackle our nation's problems, or we continue throwing money at wasteful programs and revert to the status of a third world country. My colleagues on the other side have made clear which option they will choose. They want to continue to create wasteful programs, hoping that the magic one will come along and fix all of our problems. We have to stop kidding ourselves that this is the way to create jobs and economic prosperity. Not only do we have an obligation to reduce our debt for the sake of our economy, but we have a moral obligation to our children and to our grandchildren to leave this country to them better than we have found it. Unfortunately, that's not the case right now unless we act. This Congress has a clear mandate from the people who sent us here to do our job. Cut the spending, reduce the debt. With this bill and my amendment, we will do both, and I urge passage of this amendment.
Gentleman's time's expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania rise?
I rise to strike the requisite number of words.
Gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized for 5 minutes.
We heard just the other day the leader of our great ally, Australia, in this chamber talk about the greatness of our nation and how it is the belief that we can achieve anything. This lack of confidence illustrated in the rhetoric here on the floor today about the greatness of America. Maybe we need to walk back a minute and look at how we reinvested and rebuilt Japan and Germany after the war, how we bailed out Mexico, over $40 billion, how today, this day alone, we're spending $2 billion this week in Afghanistan, and we have people all over the world trying to assist others. We will be one of the first nations rushing to help those affected by the tsunami this morning in Japan. This is a great nation. We come today, however, to say to law-abiding, tax-paying citizens who lost their job because of the shenanigans on Wall Street, that even though we were able to help the banks to the tunes of trillions of dollars, that we can't provide a small bridge loan to help a homeowner who's been paying their bills, abiding by the law, and has been affected because of the actions or the inactions of the government and of Wall Street. Now, this is not a new program built on hopes and dreams. This is a replication of a program that has been operating in Pennsylvania for 20 years. It actually has a history in which the state of Pennsylvania has put in $235 million and gotten back $250 million, in which 44,000 homeowners have been able to secure their homes over a small interruption in their employment by getting help over 24 months. This reality, yes, I'd be glad to yield.
From what party the governors of Pennsylvania have come during this period?
Well, this was started under a Republican governor, Governor Thornburgh. I introduced this as a young state legislator with no gray hair, and it has worked very well in the state of Pennsylvania, and I authored it here in this chamber. In 2007, we hit a 50-year high in mortgage foreclosures. It makes no sense to move someone out of their home, ruin their credit for a decade, have their family be homeless, when in the Pennsylvania instance, for less than $7,000 on average, you can help them over a period of difficulty. So here is the Republican majority. They say, look, we can't find it within us as a nation, even though we've helped people all across the globe, to actually pause for a minute for a paltry sum and help a citizen in our own country meet a burden and do it in a way that actually would be more cost-effective for our taxpayers. We should reject this. We should reject the notion that somehow we are so much in debt that we can't afford to help our own citizens. What we should know is we're the wealthiest country in the world. What we should know is just yesterday we should read the story about how we have a few billionaires who have trillions of dollars. We should remember that last week on the front page of the USA Today, we had a story saying that for $250,000, seats on boards of directors were going wanting in our country because they weren't being paid enough for 6 meetings a year. We can afford to pay our bills. The Republican majority says, well, let's cut 1.5% of what the federal government is going to spend this year in the face of a $1.5 trillion deficit. If they wanted to balance the budget, they should step forward with a much more aggressive plan. This is not about balancing the budget. It won't get anywhere close to balancing the budget. This is about somehow being willing to help big banks when President Bush stepped forward and said we had to do TARP. But when it comes to help a homeowner meet their obligation, somehow we have to do less than our best as a nation. This is not the America that has come to have great allies like the leader of Australia who spoke from that podium, who said we can do anything, and how the whole world looks at us as a beacon of hope. We should think again. This is ill-advised, and I hope that this House rejects this bill and today stands up for an American citizen who needs a little help. Thank you very much. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas rise?
Move to strike the last word.
Gentleman from Texas is recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, first of all, I want to commend the gentleman from Texas for his good amendment. I think it's kind of interesting that we keep talking about the country, and certainly that's important, and the taxpayers are important. But, you know, the other flaw in this program is that it encourages these people to get further in debt, and quite honestly, the level of debt that they have is their primary problem. And it's the same mentality that's kind of gotten our country in the jam that it's in, where we're going to have a vote here in a few weeks about raising the debt ceiling. It's a reason a lot of individuals and companies and governments around the world are over-leveraged. And so what we're saying is the way to fix someone's problem that has too much debt is for them to take on more debt. It's absurd to think that that's good for these borrowers. I would like to yield such time as he may consume to my good friend from Texas, Mr. Canseco.
Gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for yielding time. I think what we need to focus.
Gentleman from Texas.
Thank you. I think we need to focus on what this amendment does and the purpose of it. The purpose of it is to bring back those funds that are allocated to this failed program and bring them back into the Treasury so that the Treasury can use those funds in order to reduce the debt that we have. It is but a small return into the Treasury, but it goes a long way into fiscal responsibility so that we can continue on that path and reduce that budget. Now, with regards to the program itself that this bill or this amendment addresses, we have to realize that this program spends an enormous amount of taxpayers' money that came out of Dodd-Frank, a $1 billion HUD emergency homeowner relief program which provides loans or credit advances to unemployed borrowers. And this program would spend 98 cents per every dollar that does not come back. Those are very important to realize that these funds are taxpayer funds that would otherwise go as a grant to the borrower, not any repayment program, but grants to the borrower that does not get repaid. So with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Texas.
I yield.
Gentleman from Texas yields the balance of his time. For what purpose does the gentleman from Massachusetts rise?
To strike the last word.
Gentleman from Massachusetts recognized for 5 minutes.
First, let me address the wholly contradictory argument of the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Neugebauer. We have heard on the other side, in their eagerness to just say negative things, two entirely contradictory things. One, that this is too lavish a subsidy to the homeowner, and two, that it will further indebt the homeowner. Members do understand that that cannot possibly both be true. In fact, there is a significant element of subsidy here, and those who take this money and pay off their mortgages will get a subsidy, so they will not be further in debt. The argument just made by the gentleman, Mr. Neugebauer, is wholly without any basis. The argument that it is a more generous subsidy is a more accurate one. By the way, even if they were to pay it back, avoiding late fees and interest helps them out. So the notion that there is some problem, I will yield to the gentleman from Texas.
Well, the ranking member knows it's been billed as a loan program, but what we're saying is that it is, in fact, a grant program. But
well, then I'll take back my time. No, that's not what the gentleman is saying. The gentleman is completely contradicting himself. He says it's a grant program. He just said before that, first he was contradicting the gentleman, other gentleman from Texas. Now he's contradicting himself. He said it's a grant program. Well, if it's a grant program, why did the gentleman say it was getting people further in debt? The gentleman has been caught with a totally contradictory argument. He did not say it was a grant program. He said it was getting further in debt.
Yield?
Yes.
Well, I think one of the things that points out how terrible this program is...
No, I'm sorry. I will yield. I'm sorry. I'll take back my time. I will yield if you want to clarify what you said. You had your 5 minutes. I'm not going to yield for general philosophy. I will not yield for... I'm sorry, but it's my time. I was yielding if the gentleman thought I was misinterpreting him. For him simply to repeat what he already said takes time that I don't want to give him. He did contradict himself completely. First, it was a program that was going to put people further in debt. Now it's a grant program. He can decide which it is. I now want to go back and make my central point, which is the only reason this has any impact on the taxpayer is that the Republicans insisted on protecting the large institutions. The gentleman from Alabama said all this money is going to the large institutions. Well, that's not true, because it does go to pay off loans to keep people from being foreclosed. Some of them to smaller institutions. Some will go to credit unions. Some to community banks. But here is the point. Under our proposal, which the Republicans temporarily blocked, I hope they'll repent, all of the funding would have come from the large institutions, and the members don't want to address that. Under our proposal in the bill that passed, and we had to amend it, we're going to try to come back and change it again, every single penny that will be expended here will come from institutions of more than $50 billion in assets and hedge funds of more than $10 billion in assets. So if you do it our way, not a penny will come from the taxpayer. It will come from the large financial institutions. And yes, it will be a help to these individuals. Some of them will pay some of it back, but they won't have late fees. And yes, the gentleman was correct when he said the second time around it could become a grant program, but I will now yield to him to explain to me how it can both be a grant program and something that gets people further in debt. I'll yield to him.
Well, I have a question for the gentleman. Do you think this is a loan program or a grant program? Which do you think it is?
I understand. I think it's going to be primarily...
No, it's a question.
I'm sorry, it's my time. You asked me a question. I'm going to answer it. I will note you don't want to answer the question. I am being consistent. Yeah, I think it will work out for most people as primarily a grant program, 84%. I am pointing out the gentleman is trying to cover his own embarrassment because he made the argument without any basis that it was going to put people further in debt. He then acknowledges that it's a grant program. People do not become further indebted when they receive grants. So yes, it will work out for people who are responsible as to a great extent a grant program. That's why CBO says 84% will be spent. That 84% in our bill, as we did it, would come from the large financial institutions. I don't want it to come from the taxpayers. And while temporarily it now does, we will be offering a bill. I hope the committee, of which the gentleman is an active member, will give us a consideration, and we can amend the law under which this program is authorized so that every penny of whether it's loans or grants in some combination, it'll be primarily grants, will come from the large financial institutions and not a penny from the taxpayer. Now I'll yield.
Does the gentleman think that the language in the legislation as it's written now says does it represent it as a loan or as a grant?
It will work out as a grant. Again, I am struck by the gentleman from Texas. He's the one who said it was an excessive loan program and a grant program. He has made two entirely inconsistent statements in a very short period of time. Even for a politician, that's a record for self-contradiction. But the point is, I'm finishing talking to one gentleman. I can't do two at once, no matter how fast I talk. The point is that it is both a grant and a loan. It'll be primarily a grant.
Gentleman's time's expired. For what purpose does the gentlelady from California rise?
I have an amendment at... No? Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. I gotta wrap this one up.
The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Texas. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. Any other amendments under Section 2? What purpose does the gentleman from Texas rise?
Madam Chair, I offer amendment number 3 as the designee for the gentleman from Minnesota, Mr. Paulson.
Clerk will first designate Section 3.
Section 3, termination of emergency mortgage relief program.
The gentleman from Texas offer an amendment under Section 3.
Madam Chairman, now I offer amendment number 3 as the designee for the gentleman from Minnesota.
Will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 3, printed in the congressional record, offered by Mr. Nogbauer of Texas.
Gentleman from Texas is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I offer this on behalf of my good friend, Mr. Paulson from Minnesota. This is a good amendment. It would add military service members and veterans who have served service-related injuries, as well as survivors and dependents of such individuals, to be included in the study in this bill. These families often face hardships. They will likely need modifications to their houses to help them get around, especially if the service member is now disabled. There may be significant changes in the ability to move around and the skills that they are able to perform. This will ultimately have a significant impact on their livelihood. It is my hope that we can gain a better understanding of how we can best provide for the families of those who have served our country and paid the ultimate price. With that, I reserve my time.
The gentleman may not reserve the balance of his time under the 5-minute rule. Does the gentleman yield back? The gentleman yields back the balance of his time. For what purpose is the gentleman from Massachusetts rise?
To strike the last word, and I didn't get to
Gentleman
finish
from Massachusetts recognized for
my
5
answer.
minutes.
The gentleman from Texas who simultaneously, or not simultaneously, but consecutively denounced this program for putting people in debt and being a giveaway grant, asked me whether it was designated a loan or a grant. The answer was neither. The program is called the Emergency Mortgage Relief Program. So it leaves open what kind it would be. So that's the answer to his question, and that's why some of us were less confused than others of us.
The gentleman yield?
Yes.
Well, I think the bill says that it's a loan, and so as soon as that individual takes an advance in this program, it becomes a liability of that individual. Now, there are certain ways in this bill, either from forfeiture or through some of the provisions in this bill where that indebtedness is forgiven. But I would tell you the proper accounting is that the day that the individual payment is made on their behalf, it becomes a liability of an individual. And so the loan,
I'll take back my time. The gentleman gets himself further and further in the hole trying to explain his contradictory statements. The facts are very clear. He began by saying it was going to put them further and further in debt. That, of course, contradicted his colleagues who had said it was going to be too much of a subsidy. And, in fact, it does not say loan or grant in the title. It says emergency relief, and it does provide for a loan and forgiveness. So I am sorry the gentleman got himself tongue-tied, but don't blame the bill. I yield back the balance of my time.
And from Massachusetts yields back the balance of his time. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Texas, and all those in favor will signify by saying aye. Those opposed will say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. For what purpose does the gentlelady from California rise?
I have an amendment at the desk, number 4.
And the clerk will designate.
Amendment number 4, printed in the Congressional Record, offered by Ms. Waters of California.
Gentlelady from California is recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I rise to present my amendment, which I believe is a common-sense provision that provides transparency and clarity for distressed homeowners. Specifically, this amendment would require the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development to publish to HUD's website, a statement indicating that the Emergency Mortgage Relief Program has been eliminated. The amendment explains that this program would have provided unemployed homeowners with low or no interest or loans to assist them in paying their mortgage. Further, my amendment directs unemployed homeowners to contact their members of Congress directly, since the Emergency Mortgage Relief Program is no longer available. And if you listen to the recent debate, you can understand why this is important. First of all, we need transparency in what we do and the public policy that we make. We need to be able to communicate better and clearly with our constituents. And so they have been told and started to get involved with this program that would assist unemployed homeowners to be able to stay in their homes. As you know, this program was specifically developed so that it could deal with the high unemployment rates and the fact that people who had been working, some of them all of their lives, were now unemployed or underemployed or had medical conditions that caused them not to be able to pay their bills in the way that they had been paying them in the past. And so now that we're coming along, just since this program has started, and saying, oh, sorry, the program is eliminated, we need to be able to communicate that, and this is what this amendment would do. American homeowners deserve our assistance, and they deserve our help. And we have just experienced a recession, almost a depression, where small businesses and big businesses alike had to close their doors or to downsize, and it has left us with some of the highest unemployment rates that we have experienced in many, many years. And still, the unemployment rates are unacceptably high, still hovering around 9%. And in some communities, it's even worse than that. It goes up to 15 and 20, and in some communities, even 30%. And so, our American citizens have turned to government and say, what can I do? Can you help? This is but one of 4 programs that was designed to help them. Unfortunately, my friends on the opposite side of the aisle have decided that not only are they going to eliminate this program, the Emergency Mortgage Relief Program for unemployed homeowners, but they have decided they're going to eliminate the HAMP program, that is the Home Affordable Modification Program. Yesterday, they voted off this floor the FHA program that would assist homeowners in refinancing. And don't forget, this FHA program was really for middle-class citizens who paid their bills, who were not in default, had not lost their homes yet, but their homes were underwater. And they were trying to stay in them by reducing the mortgage, and this legislation under the FHA would have helped them to do that. You're going to hear more about the NSP program that my friends on the opposite side of the aisle is eliminating also. But today, perhaps this is the most sensitive that we're doing now. This is the most sensitive because we have seen in Pennsylvania, as was described by my friend, Mr. Shaka Fatah from that state, how this program has worked well for the last 20 years in assisting unemployed homeowners. We will set the regulations for how this is done, and of course, they will look at these individuals in terms of how long they've been unemployed, how they paid their bills, and whether or not they believe they're capable of not only utilizing the program, but repaying these loans at some point. I don't think it's too much to ask of us to be of assistance. I noticed that my colleague from Texas referred to it as these people. These people are our people. These people are American citizens. These are constituents who vote and send us here to make good public policy. It has been said over and over again that we bailed out the too-big-to-fail institutions, that we were generous in our loans to them, billions of dollars that went into those too-big-to-fail institutions. So I would simply ask for an aye vote on this very simple amendment that would bring some transparency to what we're doing. I yield back the balance of my time.
I claim time in opposition to the amendment.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you. I want to read a portion of this amendment by the gentlewoman from California. It says the Emergency Mortgage Relief Program, which has provided for which would have provided unemployed homeowners with low interest rate loans to assist them in paying their mortgage, has been terminated. If you are unemployed and concerned about not being able to pay your mortgage, please contact your member of Congress. You see, that's what is so confusing about the arguments that my colleagues on the other side, they can't decide if this is a loan or a grant. One time it's a loan, one time it's a grant. But in fact, the program says it's a loan. In fact, the HUD, Department of Housing and Urban Development, the title of their rule is Emergency Homeowners Loan Program. The other reason I rise in opposition to this is that we're terminating a program that has had 0 customers. So it seems ambiguous here to have the federal government go through a process here where we're going to notify homeowners of a program that never was instituted, never was used, that it does not exist anymore. That seems a little wasteful, and I think in many ways could be misleading, because according to it's obviously, when you look at the way that the program is structured, it becomes a grant program, and so we're misrepresenting them that in the sense that, well, it says it's a loan, but it's really not a loan, it's a grant. And so I think this is something that is one of the things that the American taxpayers are really kind of tired of, is for the government out there misrepresenting or creating confusion to homeowners that may be seeking assistance.
Will the
there are a lot of
yield?
I will not. I'll let you claim your. Anyway, I would just say that at this particular time that this is not necessary, and that it was we should not put a confusing piece of information out there on the website. With that, I would yield to the gentleman.
Thank you. I appreciate the gentleman yielding. I think it's. I need to clarify this. I was not around. I'm a freshman here in Washington D.C. I was not here for the creation of this program. But it's my understanding, and I'm hoping to hear some clarification from you, that there has not been a single application that's not even been put in, much less denied or accepted, because this program has not had the regulations promulgated, and that is correct, right? I mean, it strikes me it's like giving a job layoff notice before you've even hired anybody. And that really is the issue, it seems to me, that we need to make sure that we are getting people back to work. That is the best protection that we can possibly give to any program out there for people to make sure that they can make their mortgage payments, is by giving them a job. But I yield back. Thank you.
Well, thank you, gentlemen. I think it makes a great point. In fact, it is a program that has not had an application, has not been promulgated. And so is the reason that we feel like that this is not necessary, and I encourage my colleagues to vote against this amendment. I yield back.
The gentleman yield back the balance of his time. The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Florida rise?
I move to strike the last word.
The gentlelady from Florida is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise in opposition to H.R. 836, the Emergency Mortgage Relief Program Termination Act. This legislation, like the other war on affordable housing bills being brought to the floor by our colleagues on the other side of the aisle, seeks to terminate a much-needed federal program that helps struggling homeowners. To be clear, shutting down a badly needed foreclosure mitigation assistance program is not a solution to federal deficits and will simply hurt homeowners and the current economic recovery. Rather than turn our backs on homeowners, we should be working together to improve and expand programs to help the millions of Americans and communities affected by the housing crisis all over our nation. For several years now, many Americans have struggled with foreclosures, underwater mortgages, and abandoned and blighted properties. For local towns and cities, this crisis has also decimated their tax base, leading to a ripple-up effect, producing funding shortfalls for basic services like police, firefighters, and teachers. This creates deficits at every level of government. Now, I keep hearing from my Republican colleagues that the debt is crushing Americans, and we must act now. Well, what about the crushing debt of negative equity facing almost a quarter of all homeowners in this country? Nearly 1/4 of all Americans owe more on their mortgages than their homes are now worth. There are nearly 11 million families who feel trapped in their homes, unable to sell or move if they wanted to, or even refinance to lock in a better interest rate. And the statistics in my home state of Florida are far more staggering than the national average. 45% of all mortgages in Florida are underwater. In Broward County, where I live, that number is more than 50%. Yes, over half. More help is needed, not less. However, what is offered today is a repeal and abandon approach, leaving homeowners with few or no options. Unacceptable. For 10 weeks now, the House Republican leadership has failed to bring to the floor a single piece of legislation to create jobs, despite making occasional casual references to jobs. What they've done instead is push legislation that will destroy jobs, just like the spending bill pushed through the House a few weeks ago that would cost our economy 700,000 jobs. These housing bills risk further injury to our economic growth. Now, I can appreciate the arguments that the current housing programs have not done enough to help homeowners, and I agree. But that's why I support legislation offered by Congressman Cardoza to require Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac to refinance underwater mortgages so homeowners struggling to stay out of foreclosure can better afford to stay in their homes. And it's why I support taking a hard look at how we can improve the current federal programs so more homeowners receive assistance. But my Republican colleagues have no plan to helping make housing more affordable or keeping people in their homes, nor will they. That's because they believe the lending industry will take care of it. For those with short memories, that's the same laissez-faire approach that caused the Wall Street meltdown in the first place. The Republican leadership began the 112th Congress with a lot of fanfare by reading the Constitution on the floor of the House. Well, it's not enough to simply read the Constitution, but to abide by it and carry out its charge. Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution vests the Congress with a duty to provide for the general welfare and to regulate commerce. However, over the decade, Over the decade leading up to this housing crisis, the Congress simply abandoned its duty to the American public. Lax federal regulations and oversight led to an anything-goes attitude. Banks were making subprime loans people couldn't really afford, and then bundling these loans and selling them off, eventually becoming toxic assets that crashed our financial markets. We owe more to our constituents than Speaker Boehner's "so be it" attitude. We must do more than just stand by and say the lending industry will take care of this crisis. A foreclosure has a devastating effect on each and every homeowner and tears at the very fabric of the family. Saying you support family values is mere lip service, unless you take actions to value the family by striving to keep families intact with a roof over their head. And that's why I support the amendments offered by many of my Democratic colleagues, most of which have been ruled non-germane because, as far as I can tell, they propose helping too many homeowners. Apparently, any federal effort that would help more than 0 homeowners is simply too broad and unacceptable to the authors of this legislation. Perhaps this boils down to a fundamental disagreement of our role in looking out for our constituents and assisting at the federal level. The Democratic minority remains committed to our goals for the 112th Congress, to create jobs, strengthen the middle class, and responsibly reduce the deficit. We will continue to judge each of your bills by this standard. The legislation before us today fails on all 3 counts, and I urge my colleagues to vote against it. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlelady from Florida yields back the balance of her time. For what purpose is the gentleman